Hello and welcome back to Story of the Day for Term 6, and we're returning to David Walliams' Grandpa's Great Escape. And before the half term, we had just got to the point where Jack had stopped the funeral and had recognised that the matron and the reverend were the same person, and that the crooks were all part of the choir and the clergy. Now, before I begin reading at chapter 65, I had an amazing super listener in year 3 who noticed that the time before I'd said we've got to part 4, the way to the stars, and Jack had landed in the garden of Buckingham Palace. And then when I started the next chapter, 62, it doesn't mention anything about being in Buckingham Palace, and it just moves on, sadly, to Grandpa's funeral. And I checked, I definitely haven't missed a chapter, but it just rather strangely seems to move on without mentioning any more about meeting the Queen. How peculiar. Anyway, I'll start reading chapter 65, An Army of Oldies. As he stood at the altar, the vicar's tone began to become angry and bitter. So what if I did, child? What use was all their money, anyway, to the stupid old people? Needless to say, this did not go well in a room full of elderly people. The church was soon busy with angry murmurs. After every Sunday service, I would empty the collection tin. All the miserable old fools would give me were a few copper coins and an old button. How could I buy a holiday home in Monte Carlo, which is in Italy, on that? Boo-hoo, heckled Raj sarcastically. Oh, shush, shouted the vicar. Ooh, mocked Raj. So I hatched a plan with my grave diggers. I would start my own old folks' home and forge new wills for all the old stinkers, making their money mine. Could you talk a bit slower, please? Called out Detective Beef from the back, a notebook in his hand. I'm trying to write this all down. Detective Bone rolled his eyes. You are a wicked, wicked man, shouted Jack. And woman, added Mrs. Trifle. Yes, and woman, cried the boy. A wicked man and a wicked, wicked woman. You treated all the old folk with incredible cruelty. Oh, who cares about them? They were all completely silly. Needless to say, this did not go down well in the room either. How dare you! Exclaimed Mrs. Trifle. Get him! Ordered the Major. Charge! Shouted the Rear Admiral. With that, the old folk in the church rose to their feet and began stampeding towards the vicar and his gang. Let the police handle this, shouted Detective Bone. But the ex-residents of Twilight Towers were in no mood to listen. They wanted revenge. As the crooks tried to flee the church, the old folks chased after them. Walking sticks, handbags, Zimmer frames, all of them became weapons. Mrs. Trifle began whacking the vicar as hard as she could with a hymn book. Meanwhile, the Major had cornered the verger, a.k.a. Nurse Blossom, and pinned him against the wall of the lectern. The Rear Admiral had both nurses, Rose and Daisy, in headlocks, as Wing Commander Bunting's old RAF colleagues lined up to whack them over the head with prayer cushions. The children from Jack's history class all cheered. This criminal gang didn't stand a chance against this army of oldies. I must come to church more often, commented Raj. Never knew it was so much fun. Chapter 66. Goodbye. Jack's parents looked on at all the chaos unfolding in the church. Then they turned to their son. I'm sorry we didn't believe you first, said Mum. You were a very brave boy to take on an evil crook like that, son, added Dad. I know Grandpa would have been very proud of you. On hearing that, Jack wanted to smile and cry at the same time, so he did both. Seeing her son's tears, Mum put her arm around the boy. Despite the strong pong of stinking Bishop, and eye-wateringly smelly cheese, it felt good. Dad put his arms around both of them, and for a moment, everything seemed right in the world. The running battle between the gang of of heavies, and the army of oldies was now spilling outside into the churchyard. Jack's classmates excitedly followed the action as the two detectives tried and failed to restore law and order. "I should go home and start making cheese sandwiches," said Mum. "Everyone's meant to be coming back to ours after the service." "Yes," agreed Dad. "And these old folks are working up quite an appetite. Come on, son." "Go ahead," replied the boy. "I just want to stay here a moment longer on my own." "Oh, yes, I understand," said Mum. "Right you are, son," said Dad, and he took his wife's hand, and together they made their way out of the church. Now, it was completely empty of people, save for Jack and Raj. The newsagent put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "What an adventure you have had, Master Bumpkin." "I know, but I couldn't have done it without Grandpa." The newsagent smiled before saying, "And he couldn't have done it without you." "I'll leave you alone with him for now. I imagine you want to say your final farewell." "Thank you, I do." True to his word, Raj left the boy alone in the church with his grandfather's empty coffin. Jack looked at the wooden box and the flag and saluted. One last time. "Goodbye, Wincombe," he began, before correcting himself. "I mean, goodbye, Grandpa." And tomorrow we have got the last chapter of the book.